Hello! Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be ranking A Song of Ice and Fire books from worst to best, or from my least favorite to my favorite. The quick disclaimer is that of course this is completely subjective and everybody's gonna have a different opinion, which is a good thing, and I would actually love to hear your own personal rankings down below. This ranking will also obviously shift a little bit when the new book is finally released, so we'll see what happens with that. I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. My least favorite is definitely A Feast for Crows. I don't know if this is a popular or an unpopular opinion, but this is the only book in the series that I just found it incredibly difficult to get through. I think generally the parts that I thought were really hard to get through were the entire Iron Island storyline. To me, felt just boring, I guess. I just wasn't interested in it. I didn't like any of the characters really. I just found this, and that storyline really dominated this book a lot of the time. It was a huge part of the book, and so I just found that really difficult to get through. I will say though that I love the parts with the Dorn storyline. I think that that is so interesting, especially, well, the storyline with Ariana and her whole little thing with Marcella, and I thought that that was really, really interesting. I honestly wish that they would have included that in the show. I know that they tried to, I think, sort of adapt it with the Sand Snakes people, but I think we can all agree that that did not work. And it probably just would have worked better if they would have gone with the original material, because there's plenty of it and I thought it was really interesting. Simply because this one was more difficult to get through for me, I think it just has to be my least favorite. If it's a little bit harder to get through, clearly I don't like it as much. Next on my list is A Clash of Kings. What I like about A Clash of Kings is all of the political maneuvering, and of course the War of the Five Kings really starts gearing up. I think it's really interesting to watch kind of the rebellion in the north, and Robb Stark really comes into his own. He's named King in the North even though he's still so young, and all of the aftermath of what happened in the first book. I think it's really interesting to watch that unfold, because there's of course that intense moment with Ned in the first book where you're like, oh, okay, they did that. So to see kind of the aftermath of some of that playing out, of course, is super interesting. For me, a lot of this book just reads like setup, and I think that's not a bad thing. It's well written setup, but it just doesn't wow me in the same way as like the third book does. To me, this is an interesting book for sure, but I think it's just kind of leading up to a lot of the events that happen in A Storm of Swords. I do, of course, love following Arya's journey. I think everybody likes Arya for a reason. Her storyline is interesting. She's a really cool character, and she's really tough for like a little girl. So I really enjoy following that, but it's more of a lead-up book for me, and that's not a bad thing. It just doesn't really have that extra oomph. That was dorky to say, but you know. The next book on my list is A Dance with Dragons. I don't know what it was. I think maybe after A Feast for Crows and just kind of not loving that book, having A Dance with Dragons and going back to some more of those interesting storylines like with Daenerys, it felt like a breath of fresh air. It felt like a breath of fresh air, and I was really happy to be back in some of my favorite characters' stories again. I also think that this book ends with like a great cliffhanger with Jon Snow, and I mean, it's kind of frustrating to watch Jon Snow's progression in this, but at the same time satisfying, because I feel like it's what a lot of the readers would decide as well. So you're like, I agree with you, but also
stop doing what you're doing.
Not sure how they're gonna resolve it in the book. We'll see. I think that this book also has a lot of lead up and setup to the next book, and hopefully the next book comes to fruition at some point. That would be great. That would be great. That would be great. But I really like this book because it does have a lot of lead up, but it's interesting lead up. I am so excited for Daenerys to get to Westeros. I'm just so excited to see what happens next. So there's just a lot of anticipation at the end of this book, and I kind of like that feeling. I do think that that means there's so much pressure on the next book, but I'm pretty sure that regardless of the outcome, it'll feel good to get some payoff. I don't know, it'll just feel good. What I really don't like in this book is everything happening in the north with the Boltons. The Boltons are the worst. They are the worst. Somehow they make the Lannisters look not that bad. They're just so cold and callous, and I don't like reading those bits. I hated reading the parts with Jane Poole, and I just felt so bad for her, and I just hated. The Reek parts were tough too, but I feel like, I don't know, I don't like them, okay? I don't like them, and I don't like them having their grubby little fingers all up in the north, their grubby little hands all up in the north, trying to take away what we all know belongs to the Starks, okay? The Starks are good people. Stop it. Someone's doing yard work. I feel like someone's always doing yard work, so this can't be helped. What can you do, you know? But hopefully you can't hear it. Some guy over there. I'm just kidding. I don't know who it is, but they're probably perfectly fine. The next book on my list is A Game of Thrones. There's not a lot to say about it because it's just like the OG. It kickstarts the story. It's funny because I feel like a lot of the political maneuvering and the political machinations could come off as like dry, but they don't. They're infused with a lot of interesting character dynamics, and I feel like it's just a well-written intro into this universe. I was really happy that I watched the show first, simply because I think I would have been a little bit confused about names and keeping everybody straight. So I was kind of thankful that I watched the show first. Although of course that means that the big moment with Ned didn't maybe have quite the same effect, but it did. It did. It's just one of those, oh my gosh, they went there moments. Like, I can't believe he did that. And I feel like it was so well written, all the lead up to it. You were kind of like, is this gonna happen? Is this not gonna happen? Even though I already knew it's gonna happen. It was really such a well written book and such a great intro into this series. So I feel like it just deserves to be high up on the list for that. I also feel like we have a really great introduction to a lot of core characters, their beliefs, what shapes them, so when you see their actions in books 2 and 3, you understand it. It kind of, even if you don't agree with it, it makes sense to you, and that's kind of an important thing in a book like, in a series like this. It's a great introductory book, and for me it's really up there. I kind of go back and forth if it's third place or second place on my list, but I feel like because it's the one that kind of gets you into the series, it deserves a little bit of a higher place simply because it kind of pulls you in. And I feel like that is in and of itself a special skill of the first book. And as I'm sure you've guessed by now, number 1 on my list is A Storm of Swords. To me, it's like a hands down favorite. I feel like this book just has so much storyline. It is filled to the brim with goings-ons. I feel like a lot of what gets set up in the first and the second book really comes to a head in this book, and we've got, of course, extra, like the War of the Five Kings. We really have a lot of payoff, whether it's good or bad, whether we like it or not. There's kind of payoff for some characters' actions. Of course, this has the Red Wedding, which is just devastating to read about. Man, I didn't like reading that part. And the thing is, I already knew it was coming. I watched the TV show, and I actually wasn't allowed to watch the Red Wedding part. My husband wouldn't let me watch it because he's like, you're gonna be too upset. I like the Starks way too much to watch that portion. But then I had to read it in the book, and you can't really like skip reading it. And I mean, I'm still happy that I didn't watch it, but man, oh man, reading it was almost worse maybe. It was because now my imagination is picturing it. It was just so bad, and I didn't like that part. But overall, I do feel like that is one of many moments where there is payoff, whether or not you like it or not. There's payoff for the choices and the actions of characters. And I think that that's just important for keeping the story moving, and it really just shoves so much story into this. The part when Arya comes after the Red Wedding is just absolutely heartbreaking. That is, yeah, really, really rough. But I do like all of the parts with Arya and the Hound. To me, there's like this really, I don't know, I like the Hound's journey, and I also like this book. I think we kind of see that Jaime redemption arc, the Jaime Lannister redemption arc. I don't really know what's going to happen with it in the books. We all know what happened with it in the show. I like the Jaime redemption arc so far, and the character of Brienne is just such a heartbreaking character in the books as well, and I like their back and forth. Of course, just like everything on TV, like Brienne ends up being like a beautiful woman, but in the books she's really not supposed to be as pretty. It's the Tyrion effect, where in the books he's supposed to look basically like a monster, right? But then he's played by Peter Dinklage, who's like a really good looking guy. So it's kind of, you know, they had to do that. They had to do that for the show, I get it. But in the books, Brienne's story is really a little bit sadder, kind of. Another thing that I really like in this book is how much we get Marjorie Tyrell, because personally, I love the introduction of her character. I love her character being more prominent, and I think that she just has a really interesting character to read about. She's kind of one of those characters where you wonder how much, like, I know her family is doing a lot of maneuvering behind the scenes, but for Marjorie herself, you have to wonder how much of her is like authentic and how much is kind of playing the game. And I like that I'm wondering that. I love that I just keep wondering that. So she's a character that I love to read. A Storm of Swords is definitely my favorite for a lot of reasons. I don't really have a lot of criticisms of this book because to me it's just packed with story. It's like a deep dish apple pie of story. I think that's pretty much it for my ranking of A Song of Ice and Fire books. Let me know below what your ranking is because I'd actually be super interested to know. That is it for this video though. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you later.